There's one other thing that I want to introduce that Sentry can also help us out with. And for now, we're going to go across projects, and we're actually going to look at the count of unique issues that Sentry is creating. In this case, we're going to type in issue, it can help us get there quicker. And we're going to look at the count of unique issues compared to the absolute count of events that are coming into the project. So we're going to see how many unique groups Sentry is forming relative to the absolute volume. And perhaps to make this a little bit more clear, we can add an equation in Discover just to look at what this proportion, or to have a better sort of metric for this proportion in this case. So now we're going to sort by our highest volume projects. Let's look at the last 14 days, perhaps, across all our projects. Now we can do a quick scan of this column here to see if there's anything that kind of stands out. And what I'm seeing here, at least when we're looking at proportion of unique issues to the total number of issues, events flowing into a project, we can see at least the project we've been focusing on mostly today. Might be a coincidence, might not be, but this can give us a general indication as to maybe there's a little bit more noise in this project from a grouping or from the perspective of Sentry making grouping decisions than others. And this may be a good candidate for evaluating noise that is coming from grouping decisions. Now, I will say that this isn't a guarantee. Obviously, this sort of relative, evaluation can just be more of a signal of the inherent nature of a project. Perhaps it does produce more issues based on something that isn't necessarily related to Sentry, perhaps not grouping as you'd want it to, but nevertheless, it's a crumb that we can follow and a good starting point perhaps for evaluating how Sentry's grouping decisions may or may not be impacting your alerting strategy. So what we're going to do is actually focus in on this project, and we're going to return to the query that you're all familiar with now, and that's the top issue query in this case. Let's go to issue and count alone. Maybe we'll add title in just to save us some time. Okay, so what are we looking for here? So we're looking for different issues that may or may not share similar metadata characteristics. We could have added in stack function here. We could have added in a number of other things. We just have title for the sake of this example, but we're seeing sort of a number of issues here, at least a pretty noisy issue that share a similar, at least title, and that are grouped into separate groups. So this might be a good starting point for us to jump in and start exploring what options Sentry provides to maybe augment grouping behavior, or even to explore whether or not we can determine if Sentry is making the appropriate decision here when it comes to grouping. So without going too deep into how Sentry groups, we're looking at really the stack trace first and foremost, and we kind of fall back to exception type and value and then message if depending on what data is available. But Sentry can help you in any issue identify similar issues based on these concepts or these parts of the metadata. So in this case, we see two issues come up here that are similar, and Sentry will give us sort of a spectrum to evaluate that upon. So perhaps the stack trace frames match in this case. Maybe we want to explore this issue more, but the main takeaway here is this is a tool to evaluate your ability to consolidate errors within Sentry, like right off the bat, and also to consolidate perhaps the signal that you're alerting based off of, and reduce any noise that you might be getting unnecessary alert triggers based on just different groups being formed that represent kind of the same fundamental problem within Sentry. So this is one quick way that you can evaluate and even resolve the issue right within the UI.